good evening, and welcome everyone. My name is Sherry Gaki, Communications and Storytelling Manager at Greenpeace Africa, and I'll be moderating tonight's conversation. Thank you all for being here. Tonight, we are confronting one of the most consequential decisions Kenya has faced in this generation, whether this country should build a nuclear power plant on the shores of Lake Victoria. This is one of the most heavily debated projects in Kenya right now. And just weeks ago, that debate spilled into the streets of Siaya, where hundreds of community members protested against the project, rejecting a plan many of them say was made without them. Let me set a little bit of how we got here. At the International Conference on Nuclear Energy earlier this year, the government confirmed its intention to press ahead with a 2,000 megawatt plant, an estimated $500 billion construction targeted to begin in 2027 and commissioning by 2034. That announcement turned a long-running policy ambition into an imminent reality. But here is what is striking. The plant was not originally meant for Siaya. It was first proposed for the coast in Kilifi, where communities opposed it and went to court to stop it. From there, it moved to Siaya, to the shores of Lake Victoria, even though Kenya's own environmental assessment had earlier flagged this region's geological instability, sitting as it does within the East Africa rift system. And with this project, Kenya is not alone. Just across the border, Uganda is advancing its own nuclear project at Buyende, also drawing on the waters of the same lake system that eventually feeds Lake Victoria and the Nile. So we are looking at not one, but multiple nuclear ambitions clustered around a single shared body of water. Lake Victoria, as we know it, is the largest freshwater lake in Africa. It is shared directly by Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and through the Nile, it sustains communities downstream in South Sudan, Sudan, and Egypt. We have tens of millions who depend on it for fishing, for farming, for drinking water, and livelihoods. This lake is already under serious strain through pollution, declining fish stocks, invasive species, industrial and agricultural runoff, and contamination from activities such as gold mining. Into this already fragile, already shared, already stressed ecosystem, two countries now propose to introduce nuclear power. Globally, we see that the world is deeply divided as well on nuclear. Some countries are doubling down from established nuclear powers in the West and to South Africa, here on our own continent, which has operated a nuclear plant for decades, and also faced its own legal battles over expanding it. Others are walking entirely away from these projects. Germany is one of the most advanced economies and has shut down its last nuclear plants and exited nuclear power altogether. We cannot have this conversation honestly without naming the disasters that also haunt nuclear projects. That's Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, events whose human and environmental costs are still being paid decades later. So that's what we're here to do, ladies and gentlemen, to put all these considerations on the table, the promises, the perils, the local, the global, the science, and the lived reality, and ask the question at the heart of this webinar: on whose terms, at whose risk, and at what cost should Kenya pursue nuclear power? And is Kenya actually ready for this project? We are joined by an exceptional panel who will help us answer these questions. We have the official government voice in the NuPEA leadership, and advocates who will make the case for why nuclear is part of Kenya's future. We have opponents who will tell us why this is the wrong path, or at least the wrong way to walk it. We have a voice from the affected community in Siaya, and we have regional and international experience from those who have lived through these decisions elsewhere. Let me be upfront about who is convening this conversation and why. Greenpeace has opposed nuclear power for more than 50 years, since our founding, and our position is plain that nuclear is dangerous, dirty and expensive, and it has no place in safe, clean, sustainable future. Greenpeace Africa does not believe in this is the right choice for Kenya, but a position that we hold this honestly must also be tested honestly. And that's why we are building these real debates, where we've invited people who disagree with us to make their strongest case, and we will give them the floor and respect to do so. My job as moderator is to put fair and rigorous questions to every side. Your job as the audience is to weigh what you hear and judge for yourselves. We are confident enough in our position to let it be challenged in the open. This evening, we are joined by an exceptional panel. We have CS Justus Wabuyabo, the CEO of Nuclear Power and Energy Agency, NuPEA, the man leading Kenya's nuclear program. We also have Peter Gishuki, who is making a case for nuclear energy. He's a program coordinator at We Planet Africa, an organization that supports nuclear projects across the continent, and Andrian Debu, an energy advocate and climate activist with extensive experience in nuclear energy and international diplomacy, joining us from the Kenya Young Generation in Nuclear. On the opposing side, we have Fred Njehu, Greenpeace Africa's Pan-African political strategist and one of the continent's most prominent voices on climate justice and energy politics. We also have Amos Wemanya, senior climate advisor on renewable energy and just transition at Powershift Africa, who brings deep expertise on the economics of energy in Africa. And we have Gwendolyn Hall-Smith, Executive Director of Global Community Initiatives, who has spent decades studying what nuclear infrastructure does to communities and worked in Ukraine in the aftermath of Chernobyl. From the region, we are joined by Francesca de Gasparis, Executive Director of the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute, a co-applicant in the landmark case that successfully challenged South Africa's nuclear expansion on constitutional grounds, and a former leader of the Greenbelt Movement International, the organization founded by the late Professor Wangari Maathai. Most importantly, we have Dickens Otieno, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and a resident of Liunda Beach in Siaya County, one of the very sites being considered for these plans. He is here to speak from the place where this decision will be felt most directly. So I'll jump right in and start with Amos. Amos, let's set the scene. Kenya already gets close to 90% of its power from renewables, yet the government says it needs nuclear to reach 10,000 megawatts. In plain terms, what problem is nuclear meant to solve, and is that problem real?
Yes, thanks so much, Sherry, for having me. And I must acknowledge that this is a great conversation that we're having concerning our country. To begin with, I'll start by saying that allow me to say that Kenya actually does not have a problem of cleaning its grid. The challenges that we face here today in Kenya is the question of energy access for the 20% of Kenyans who do not have access to electricity. Today, 1 in 5 Kenyans doesn't have access to electricity, most of them living in rural settings. Those who have access, they have a challenge with affordability. The cost of electricity in Kenya is too high. So if you ask me whether Kenya needs more electricity, I'll say yes. 1, for access. Whether nuclear is the best option, I'll say no. Because to build nuclear, it takes at least 15 to 20 years from planning to operation. That's the minimum. When we come back home to speak about Kenya, Kenya Nuclear Electricity Board was set up in 2012. To 2026 today is about 14 years. We've spent billions. Wait, let me take that again. The government of Kenya has been allocating budget to nuclear activity. And we've tracked from 2020 to now, we've spent about 6 billion in nuclear-related activity. But when you look around, still, there's no sign. Like you rightly mentioned, we started with Kilifi, now we think about Siaya. There's no reactor. We can't see any. And there's no electricity. That has to be registered. Imagine what 6 billion, and this is just the budgets allocations that we've tracked from 2020. So there are other previous allocations since 2012 when the Kenya Nuclear Electricity Board was set up. So it's more than 6 billion. Imagine what this amount would have done in terms of if we were to invest in solar deployment, if we were to invest in geothermal, if we were to invest in rural electrification. Would we be still talking about affordability? Would we be still talking about the number of people, 1 in 5, not having access after spending all these billions? The question is, let's imagine what 6 billion would have done. And it's more than that. It takes time. Kenya needs power this decade, not promises for decades. We have already had promises of nuclear electricity for 14 years. No site, no reactor. Do we need more years of promises? I don't think so. Do we need to keep borrowing for us to maintain these agencies? Because actually, if you ask me what we've spent on this, it's just running people's salaries. No, nothing. Maybe a report. So the fastest way to reach 100% energy access, to reduce affordability, is not to wait for 20 years. It's not to wait for one project that's going to take long. It's to start now investing in small projects that are decentralized, that are able to help us power energy access, power industries, power manufacturing, create jobs for many Kenyans and not just for a few working for agencies.
Wow, you've started us off on a very high note, Amos. And before we actually dive deeper into this, Dickens, before we get into the policy debates, let's ground this. You live in Liunda Beach, one of the candidate sites, when Siaya heard a nuclear plant was coming to its shoreline. What was the reaction and what is at stake for your community? Dickens?
Okay, thank you so much. I think I'm audible enough, and I might state that I am also joined by members of the community in this forum, not only from Liunda Beach. Even people will be affected in other candidate sites like Ugambi. There are people from Luanda Otieno. They are experts from Siaya in this forum who are also listening. Because essentially they are the primary stakeholders in the project. So number one, I want to state that it is unfortunate that we, the residents of Siaya, get to learn more about nuclear from the media podcast than from the government itself. So essentially, it is the government that's supposed to be giving us information about nuclear. What is this nuclear thing? We have never heard about it in Kenya. We have only heard about it maybe when there were, allegations of there were accidents happening in other countries. So we first heard about nuclear on the June of 27th, 2025, when there was a conference at the Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University that was actually organized by the politicians. The politicians were actually saying that they had consulted with the residents, and the residents were agreeable to the project, which is very unfortunate because this was the first time we had as a community, as the people of Siaya, and even for the entire people in Kenya, that the nuclear project had been shifted from Kilifi to Siaya. There were no such plans. So we first heard about it on the June of 27th of 2025. A lot is at stake. Number one, my people have been living in their land since they were born. We were born and we found ourselves there. Our ancestors were born in that land. So there's an issue of resettlement, where are people going to be relocated to? Those are very important questions that the community are asking. Are they going to be, evicted from their traditional lands? That is number one question that they are asking. Number two, they are really concerned. They don't understand these projects. As I had said before, that the community first heard about the project from the Jaramogi Oginga Odinga University conference. And the second time they heard about the project was when some officials from NuPEA came to the village to inform them that they would need some 150 acres for the project. And then the third time that now led to the protest was when these officials now purported to come to the site to collect some soil samples. How do you collect soil samples, for a project that people don't have any idea about what it is? So there is that information gap amongst the community in regards to the projects. There's the resettlement issue. There's also the livelihood questions. But most importantly, there is what we call public anxiety, because the political pronouncement does not match what's happening, what's supposed to be happening in light of a project of such magnitude. So the politicians say we want to do groundbreaking by 2027, we want to commission by 2034. When we still don't have even the final CESA report, it was rejected. And many organizations and think tanks have weighed on it. It was rejected on many grounds. And by the way, as you've rightly pointed out, that report disqualified Lake Victoria region as a possible site, for the nuclear power plant. And now the community are actually asking what has changed. What has changed that now you want to bring the nuclear power plant in Kenya? Because indeed, if groundbreaking is to happen in 2027, then by now we would be talking about resettlement. We would not be speaking about, full environmental impact assessments and other things. So there is unnecessary public anxiety that has been caused by the government and many stakeholders in this project. But most importantly, the community are opposed to nuclear power plant. They have seen the impact everywhere else. Siaya is a county of 1 million people. If there is a nuclear accident, where are you going to take this 1 million people? Those are questions that the community are asking themselves. So I would like to stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Dickens. I want us to move to CS Justus Wabuyabo. CS, as the CEO of NuPEA, you are the architect of this program. So let's begin with the official case. Why has Kenya chosen nuclear as part of its energy future? What does it deliver that alternatives cannot? And what would you say to Kenyans watching tonight who are anxious about it?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me, Sherry, and I'm glad to meet my other colleagues and to connect with the other experts and to hear their views. I also want to say that, like you, we would like to hear the views of everyone with an open mind to listen to the concerns that people have about nuclear. And as a government, we pursue this project, we do it in the right way. But let me begin by saying this. First of all, I will say without any fear that nuclear is not a gamble. Nuclear is really the future. The whole world is looking at nuclear. We are seeing the global community talk about tripling nuclear energy by 2050. And we have seen a lot of changes, even in terms of institutions that had blacklisted nuclear, such as the World Bank, changing their position. and confirming that they will want to consider nuclear. And why really nuclear? I will say that nuclear presents a lot of advantages for a country like Kenya. And allow me to give this example. If you're doing agriculture, you can depend on rain-fed agriculture and pray that God brings rain for the crops to grow. But you can also, with time, if you know that you will want food next year and in 10 years and in future, you can decide to build an infrastructure that will allow you to do irrigation. And we are saying we can equate this to the source of energy that we have, such as solar and wind and hydro, that we get from nature. And we are really glad that Kenya, we are able to generate about 90% of our energy from green sources. And we want to ensure that we make it 100% by phasing out the dirty sources, the thermal generation that we are doing, by bringing in nuclear, which has been determined to be clean energy in the sense that it doesn't produce any greenhouse gases during operation, and also from the fact that it has a very small footprint compared to other sources. And we are not competing with the other sources, but we are saying that nuclear should come in to complement. The reason why nuclear presents a good opportunity for Kenya and many other countries is because when you look around the globe and see the developed countries, there's something that you will likely to find that energy consumption is generation and consumption has a strong correlation to a country's development. We see countries like the US consuming about 12.4 megawatts per capita. Countries like Canada, 15.4 megawatts. And Kenya, we are really talking about very low consumption, which cannot allow us to industrialize and develop. There's a concern about nuclear and it being dangerous, but again, we have statistics that show that nuclear is really safe. When you look at comparisons, you will find that in terms of other sources, nuclear has the least deaths per terawatt hour. If you look at sources like gas, we have very high death rates coming from that. And we are saying that in these matters, let's look at science. And Kenya, as was pointed out, has deliberately decided that we will take our time and do it right according to the best practices applied in other parts of the world. And we are religiously following the IAEA milestone approach to ensure that the process is undertaken in a way that ensures that we will deploy the technology safely and securely. In terms of engaging the people, let me just state this, that the nuclear conversation is a conversation that must be had before you even consider the technology. You must have it in the planning stage. You must have it continuously during the operation and even at the commissioning stage. So what my colleague from Liunda, Derek, says, let me just assure him, is that the conversation is ongoing and will continue to engage the people of Siaya and Kenyans as a whole, so that we get them to understand what we are doing as a government in the deployment of this technology and ensuring that is done in a very safe manner. In terms of the CESA report that Derek talks about, let me just say this, that report is still a work in progress, and it will finally be out and it will go through a validation exercise where everyone will have an opportunity to come and say their piece. In terms of saying that developed countries are phasing out, yes, we know about the situation in Germany, but recently we had the Vice Chancellor state categorically that it was a grave strategic mistake that the country did. And I'm sure in future, Germany is actually reconsidering its decision in this area. And we see that Nuclear is a modern technology that is being adopted by the rest of the world, and it's something that Kenya should also consider. In terms of deployment, yes, it takes a while, but that happens with any good thing. It requires you to spend enough time and resources to ensure that you do it right. And this is what we have decided as a country that we will do to ensure that when we have the first nuclear plant, it will not pose any risks to our people and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Justus. I just want us to switch gears to Peter, who is also a proponent of this project. Peter, We Planet Africa supports nuclear projects right across the continent. So you bring the regional view. Kenya is pursuing nuclear on Lake Victoria, and just across the border, Uganda is doing the same on the same shared lake. Is it wise to cluster two nuclear ambitions around the same shared body of water?
First, thank you so much for having me join this conversation. And maybe let's set the stage here. And as Amos said, 1 in 5 Kenyans lack access to electricity. And in a country like Uganda, that number is even higher, around 35%. So maybe 2 in 5 Ugandans lack access. And what that means is that majority of these people that do not have access to electricity are based in the rural areas. So when you look at the people that lack access, it means that they are going to spend a lot of time, lost time when it comes to maybe cooking. They're exposed to indoor air pollution from traditional cooking fuels, compared to people who are enjoying the benefits of electricity. So what this means is that this energy poverty that we have in Kenya and Africa as a whole means that sometimes there are hospitals that are going to go without electricity, and this means that people in the ICU are going to lose their lives. It means that students do not get adequate lighting maybe for them to do their studies. So you can't place that same student who is learning on maybe a candlelight at the same standards as somebody who is enjoying the full benefits of electricity somewhere maybe in the West. And so when you think about it, families in Africa are not really benefiting from the technologies that they could be. Even the fishermen at the lake do not get maybe access to the freezers that could be used to extend their catch for longer. And so at We Planet Africa, we say that we are energy agnostic. And this means that if we could get the benefits of nuclear energy from solar, then we'd probably advocate for solar. If we could get them from hydro, then we'd advocate for hydro. But then the thing is that for us to have an energy proper as Africa is that we need an energy mix that has all these, that is abundant, that is reliable, that is also affordable, as maybe Amos had mentioned, and also that offers clean electricity. And it's a nice thing that Kenya's electric grid is mostly consistent of clean electricity with geothermal and hydro. But then we see that these clean energy sources cannot provide power around the clock to support the industrial growth that the continent requires to move to the next step. And this is why we actually support nuclear energy, because it's one of the clean sources of electricity, and it has one of the lowest carbon footprints out there. And also, as a matter of fact, it also produces baseload power. And this is some of the things that will help in strengthening the energy security of the continent. And ultimately, the conversation is not like about nuclear for its own sake. It's about ensuring that every African has access to the energy they need to live a healthier, safer, and more prosperous life. And when you ask about having that shared lake system, I think the Ugandan nuclear power plant is not being planned to be set up on Lake Victoria. I think it's Lake not sure about the name, but it's not on Lake Victoria, even though most lakes in Uganda feed to Lake Victoria. But then we need to understand that the sheer magnitude of Lake Victoria. So ideally, it covers around almost maybe 70,000 kilometers square. And this makes it the second largest freshwater lake in the world, basically in the world. And for context, we have a nuclear power plant in Argentina that uses an area just as small as 54 kilometers squared for all its cooling needs. And this is enough to sustain the energy generation, while at the same time maintaining a level of warming within the lake that is under acceptable level. And it's important to understand that when nuclear power plants are running, they do not use 100% of the water that gets into the nuclear power plant. In fact, they use, I think, around 1% of the water that comes in, and the rest, the 99% that remains, is put back into the body of water that it had originated from at a slightly higher temperature. And I think there's a range of around 5 to 10 degrees, a maximum of 5 to 10 degrees, where they should not exceed this in terms of production, in terms of heating the water that is put out. And so you can see that in the world, there are strict environmental regulations, mostly set by the IAEA, that is the International Atomic Energy Agency, that govern how this used water is placed back into the lake ecosystem. And so the owner-operator, the organizations that are running the nuclear power plant, they are required to monitor the water quality, they are required to monitor the temperature, they are required to monitor the aquatic ecosystems that are there in the water. That is before the implementation of the nuclear plant and during the running, to ensure that there are no significant changes that may affect the ecosystem there. And so when these plants are being proposed by the lake, we shouldn't really be thinking about the location. The most important thing is to think that whether the environmental impact assessments are adequate to demonstrate that this ecosystem can be protected. And this is done by monitoring systems that are in place. And so we can even see around the world that there are many nuclear power plants that have safely operated along rivers. There are those that have operated along lakes, and most have operated along the coastal environments. And all this operates under strict environmental regulations. So I think the only thing that right now we should be thinking about is how these standards are going to be maintained. And with the guidance of the IEA, I believe that Kenya and Africa as a whole is ready to actually adopt this and implement the standards to ensure that there is no harm that is that falls upon the lake system.
Thank you for that, Peter. And I want to move to Andrian, who is also a supporter of this project. And Andrian, you understand the geological, environmental, financial, and waste risks quite well. I just want you to take us through the risks you take most seriously, and then tell us concretely, how do you see Kenya realistically mitigating these risks that come up, given where the country is today and not an ideal future? Andrian?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So thank you. Okay, so one of the issues I feel a place prone to seismic waves, and I feel that issue is covered when the nuclear power plant is being constructed. The engineers have put some measures in place to make sure that the power plant will not be affected by the seismic waves. Another thing is the Lake Victoria. Before the nuclear power plant is, before we have the nuclear power plant in Kenya, NuPEA and other parastatals will ensure that such bodies like the Lake Victoria will be well protected. I'm a big supporter of nuclear because first, Kenya has handled nuclear, but in small capacities in medicine. And also, the IAEA is helping to ensure that we meet the safety standards before the construction of the nuclear power plant. So it's not just Kenya alone, but it's an international thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrian. I just want us to switch over to, sorry? Yeah, maybe you can just go ahead and mute. Thank you for that. Yeah, I want to switch over to Francesca. Francesca, you bring lived national experience of nuclear. What has decades of nuclear power actually meant for South Africa in terms of cost, safety, and waste? And why did your organization take the expansion deal to court and subsequently win? Then I just want you to bring it home now that you've heard from the proponents of these projects. Lake Victoria is shared by 3 nations and also feeds the Nile to 3 more, none of whom have consented to this project. What does Kenya owe its neighbors, and what happens when that consultation is skipped?
Thanks, Shuri. Thanks so much, and good evening, everyone. It's a real privilege to address and be part of a panel of Kenyans. And I love civil society debate, and that there's so many different people here willing to share their views, and I appreciate being here. So thank you so much, everyone. So I now work for SAFC, the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute, and SAFC has been part of monitoring nuclear energy plans, nuclear energy developments, and as Shuri said, we've taken the government to court actually 3 times on nuclear energy. The first actually predates my time at SAFC, but we had some team members who'd previously worked with Greenpeace Africa, Earthlife Africa in Johannesburg for the pebble bed modular reactor, which is the small modular reactor. Now, nuclear is a really big topic, so I could take up the rest of our time. So I'm going to try and be really brief. These SMRs, these small modular reactors, were part of the plan in South Africa. And just to give you an idea of that speculative energy system, the amount that was wasted during that period was over 9 billion rand, which is just over, it's 1.3 billion US dollars that was wasted in the preparation for the SMRs. And there was actually a court case from civil society to government to stop that, because it was just this ballooning cost. That was during the preparatory period. And that was in the early 2000s up to 2010. Then later we heard that there had been a deal made with Russia, which hadn't been through our parliamentary process. We actually learned this from Russian civil society groups who said, hey, there's a deal with Russia, with South Africa for new nuclear energy. And that was for about 9 gigawatts. And it was going to cost over 1 trillion rand by conservative estimates. And that was then also, we said we don't want new nukes because what we've seen is that it's often a vehicle for graft. So there are a lot of pushbacks with very big energy projects like this. And it's very difficult for countries in Africa, in our experience, to have the the skill sets and the capacity to actually run a project like this. So actually in South Africa, there's often a debate, oh, it's just an agreement, a political agreement so that people can make money out of it, that they're not actually serious about new nuclear energy. And that's an argument that I've often heard in South African society. We always take serious government decisions on energy planning, but when we look at energy modeling from all the independent experts, South Africa certainly does not need nuclear energy. There's a lot of myths around baseload energy. We do not need that for our countries, for South Africa to actually provide energy. In fact, our energy systems, these are energy systems that were designed in the 20th century and we're now in the 21st century. So they're actually very old. And now we're dealing with renewables and ways with batteries and so on that are really fantastic. And there's a lot of information on that, which I don't have time to cover here. And also, I'm not the expert on how to make sure our grid actually provides for all of us, but the technology is there. So I think when people argue that we need nuclear for baseload, that is actually being refuted. So I'm not going to be able to go into it, but so those are the challenges around nuclear energy. And I know Kenya also keeps an eye very carefully on corruption and what government is doing. So in our experience, I would say that civil society should not be pro-nuclear because it costs 3 times the amount to produce the same electricity as renewables. So if you want cheap, affordable, quick, safe energy, renewables are the way forward. Also, you guys are so lucky. You've got solar. You've also got thermal. So I would say, yes, Kenya's in such a strong position. And I really wouldn't go with an outdated energy source. Obviously, it's not my business, but I'm just telling you what's happened from South Africa. I wouldn't want to meddle in your affairs because I think it's very important for Kenyans to decide what Kenyans want and really be respectful of that. But I know that Kenyan society, once they understand the risks of nuclear, the kinds of disasters that have happened in Fukushima and Chernobyl, that lasts forever. Now, nuclear waste, there is no safe way to store it. It costs tens of thousands of years to actually keep it safe. And, concrete only lasts like 50 years or 100 if you're lucky. So how do we really, what are we passing on to future generations? And I think as a faith-based organization, we don't believe it's ethical to go with that kind of dangerous, radioactive, polluting energy system. I mean, we just don't need it. So there are lots of other options right now that I think would be beneficial to South Africa. And I'd be happy to share more in future with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesca. I see a hand from Justus. Maybe just quickly before I move on to the rest of the panelists.
Yes,
Justus?
I think I would like to take an exception with what Francesca says about Africa lacking skills to run nuclear. I think that is a biggest fallacy. I have been in many, many forums, and we have very many Africans in Canada, very many Africans in China, very many Africans in the US, Africans, Kenyans, Nigerians, South Africans, Ugandans working in nuclear plants in those countries. Why should Africans go and run nuclear plants in Europe and not run nuclear plants in Africa? We have very, very smart people. I can tell you as the CEO of NuPEA, we have very many Kenyans who have been trained to run nuclear and we're ready. And if we're to start a nuclear plant, and our intention as Kenya is that we want to do it the way the Chinese and the Koreans did it. We are going to import the first technology, and our intention is that within 10 years, we should be able to build African nuclear power plants and be able to export it to the rest of the world. I think that notion that Africans are not able to do certain things is an outdated idea, and Africans are as good as any other people to run nuclear plants. In terms of corruption, I think let's not be skeptical. When African governments decide that they want to do something good, I think it's better to pressure test the proposals rather than be skeptical and be emotional about it, bringing in emotional topics such as corruption to try and stifle a great idea. And in terms of nuclear waste or spent nuclear fuel, I think the technology is evolving, and we cannot refuse to take advantage of a technology that is available. What we need to do, and this is already happening, the international community through the IAEA and other organizations such as the World Association of Nuclear Operators, they are working together to find solutions to these issues. And as we speak, Finland has already developed geological depositories where spent nuclear fuel will actually be taken as a final resting place. And let's not spend a lot of our energies on fear, but let's invest in science and take advantage of a technology that will actually make the lives of African people and all the people of the world better. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Francesca, just a quick response to what Justus raised. Then
Very
we can move
quick
on.
response. Yeah, I do appreciate Justus. And of course, he is, did you say you're the leader of NuPEA? So of course, he does have a vested interest in this, and it's good to hear from those who want this for Kenya. I think as Kenya once had this great saying, please misunderstand me correctly. I'm not saying that there aren't amazing nuclear engineers from Africa, and in no way would I ever want to put down Africa. Africa is an amazing continent. I'm just saying, let's get up with this century. And for me, I don't know about you guys, but for me, corruption is not an emotional topic. I would say it's a real and present danger in all society around the world. So it's something that we as people living in Africa need to be aware of. And I think it's something which is super important when we look at big energy projects. Let's just look at the UK and Hinkley C project. That thing is completely overblown. Its budget completely overblown. Its construction time. That's in the UK, guys. Let's learn from others and let's not make the same mistakes. Thank you so much, and all the best for the rest of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. I'd just like to move on to our next panelist. That's Fred from Greenpeace Africa. Fred, let's zoom out to the global picture because you track this closely. Around the world, the nuclear story splits. Some nations are building, others like Germany are walking away entirely after decades of experience. What is the real global trend on nuclear right now? You've also had Francesca touching on that. And what should Kenya be learning from the countries that have already lived this decision, both the ones that pressed ahead and the ones that turned back from these projects? Fred?
Yeah, I think, thank you very much, Sherry. And I'm enjoying the debate. And you have brought in a very interesting question. Because I was having this conversation with Germans, because I'm in Germany right now. And this question is actually coming up quite strongly, especially in the conservative government, which is currently in place. But I think I'll jump straight into the question of what we can learn as a country. You have to understand your economic system as a country, because that informs the decisions that you make, especially around energy and other economic decisions that a country pursues. That's number one. And secondly, you also have to look at the key trends, especially how other countries have experienced nuclear power. Nuclear definitely requires a lot of international cooperation. It's not a cheap affair. And I was hoping to hear that from the proponents, especially around financing, because I'm much more interested in the economics of it. Secondly, around the energy demands in Kenya, and I think that was touched on earlier on. So let me pedal back because I have, I think, a few minutes. The peak electricity demand in Kenya is about 2,300 megawatts, and the installed capacity is around 3,000 megawatts currently. So that means we have a surplus, and so we are looking at nuclear as an option, not to to create more power, but as a project that answers other questions. And I'll go straight into also responding to some of the issues that have been raised. Number one, Kenya is not less industrialized because we don't have a nuclear power plant or nuclear energy. It's because of our economic setup. our industrialization, if you look at manufacturing, is about less than 10% of the GDP for the last 10 to 20 years. So essentially, we've been stuck, and not because we don't have power or we don't have a nuclear power plant. And majorly is because of our distribution and other inefficiencies that our power gets lost along the way. I will also speak to how we've seen geothermal rise, because it's one of the major sources of power. A lot of independent power producers have to be brought in. A company like Kengen had to be privatized substantially so that investors can come in. What that means is the country is trapped into paying these independent power producers, number one, but also borrowing, because we have to endeavor to get a loan for this facility. So the figures are there. I don't want to go into the figures, but I want to mention that Kenya is the 46th poorest country in the world, but we have the 61st largest budget in the world. What does that mean? What am I trying to say here? Is that we will have to borrow heavily to kind of finance this. We are entering into a debt trap as a country if we decide to go that way. But also importantly, our debt to budget, our debt to GDP is over 50%, which is significantly high. So the cost of it definitely is so exaggerated, but we also have to look at the consumption of power. We have to look at the incentives that come with energy within the country. So how do we marry all that? And I think the South African case study is an interesting one to consider. So there are several countries in Africa that have small reactors. They have small nuclear research centers like Egypt, Morocco, DRC initially had one. We also have, I think, Algeria and a few more others. But before I stop, I want to also speak to the question of, the vested interest when it comes to mega projects, because as a country, we are used to these mega projects that, cost a lot of money. The deals are not, shared with, the communities or even the population. We don't really have, the facts, from the government side of things. So we question that, and we also want to see, these arrangements and these agreements publicized so that we can have a more informed debate, and also we get to inform our communities accordingly. So let me stop there for now.
Thank you, Fred. I see a hand from Peter. Peter, just quickly, then we can move on to the next panelist.
Sure. I think the one thing I'd like to raise a question on is how Fred has said that Kenya has surplus electricity, but then we'd like to note that I'd like to note that this is mostly during the day. The highest demand will occur during the day when all the different energy sources are running at capacity. That is, hydro is running, wind is running, and solar is running. But then you realize that at night, the solar is not running at all. There is zero generation from the solar sources that we have as a country, meaning that at this period, there is that period of intermittency where energy generation sometimes is actually less than the peak demand. And so the only way that we can actually combat this and have energy that is on throughout for the entire period, whether or not it's day or night, whether or not there is wind, whether or not there is enough rainfall to sustain us, is if we have nuclear. And
Peter, Fred, do you want to respond to that? Oh, we see Amos's hand is up. Amos, just quickly respond to that, and then we can move to the next panelist.
Yeah, just quickly. There is this tired argument around intermittency. Just to begin with, technology is growing very fast. So with solar alone and storage, we are able to run industries 24/7. But for Kenya, we are very lucky. we have geothermal. I don't know how much you know, Peter, about Kenya's geothermal capacity. We have at least 10,000 megawatts of geothermal. We haven't even used more than 10% of that. We haven't extracted that geothermal, which is easier to deploy, cheaper, safer, provides the best load. So this tired argument around intermittency and having to have nuclear as best load, I don't think it holds, because for Kenya, we have geothermal if you are refuting the element of storage for solar.
Thank you, Amos. Allow me to just move to the next panelist, and your response on that, Peter, maybe you can weave it into your next question. And I want to move on to Gwendolyn. Gwen, you studied nuclear for decades and worked in Ukraine after Chernobyl. Is nuclear truly the clean solution it's marketed as, and as we're hearing it, being named in this discussion? And what does living with this infrastructure actually teach communities?
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me on the panel. I hope you can hear me okay. I mean, it's fantastic Greenpeace put this panel together. I became interested in nuclear power back at the time of almost one of the very first nuclear accidents at Browns Ferry, which was in the United States. Browns Ferry was an accident that was caused completely by human error. They were using candles, fire, to look at electric wires, and all the electric wires that controlled the plant went through this one room. And the candles caused that room to catch on fire, and the plant melted down. Well, I was only 15 years old when that happened, and I read about it, and I thought, this is a crazy kind of technology that we're actually jeopardizing both the environment that we depend on for our lives and human lives, animal lives for electricity. So no, I would say absolutely not. Nuclear does not play out as a nice, safe, clean, easy form of energy for the communities that host them. I was instrumental in shutting a plant down in Massachusetts called Roe Yankee back about 25, 30 years ago. Roe Yankee wasn't even built with a containment building. And so the levels of childhood leukemia around the plant were very high, way higher than in the towns nearby. As you mentioned, I worked in Chernobyl after the nuclear accident there, where 125,000 square kilometers of land were destroyed for production, for agricultural production, human habitation, and frankly, habitation of the animals that live nearby. 165 people were exposed during the accident to high-level radioactive poisoning. I think about 70 of them died within a very short time after the accident. And after the accident, there's been over 20,000 cases more than would be normally of thyroid and other forms of cancer in the vicinity of the Chernobyl plant. They literally had to move people out of those 125,000 square kilometers into other cities. So the country had to build these new apartment buildings outside of Kiev. There's a whole neighborhood outside of Kiev that are like the Chernobyl refugees. In a similar way, the accident at 3 Mile Island, which occurred back in 1979 in the United States, contaminated a lot of land around the plant and significantly affected the biodiversity that is found around the plant even to this day. Cancer levels were higher, agricultural production went down, and that plant is still not opened again. So the risk of nuclear accident and the fact that nuclear accidents are mostly caused by human error. You can have all the science you want, you can have all the safety protocols you want, but as soon as some electrician goes into a room and uses a candle to test the electric wires, all of that goes out the window and you're left with a complete unmitigated disaster. Fukushima has polluted the vast majority of the Pacific Ocean at this point. It was a huge, horrible disaster that, of course, was caused by a naturally occurring phenomenon, but still, those naturally occurring phenomenon are a real risk in the Siaya County region. And, the impact on Lake Victoria is also potentially very significant because the thermal load that a nuclear power plant puts on a water source can raise the ambient temperature of a lake over 2 degrees Celsius. That has a very significant impact on biodiversity in the lake. And right now, even now, because of the pressures of climate, Lake Victoria is already suffering some biodiversity losses because the lake is warming up some. Putting a nuclear power plant on that lake is going to jeopardize the fisheries. It's going to and that's just in normal operations without any accidents or without any problems. It's going to be a disaster for the people who depend on that lake for their livelihoods. Further, I have seen no plans for the long-term storage and disposal of the waste that is radioactive and dangerous for 250,000 years. That's 25 times longer than human beings have even had writing as a way of keeping records. We're going to have to develop some kind of nuclear priesthood that goes on and on and on and on and on. And as you mentioned earlier, the capacity that we have to keep this stuff safe just flat out does not exist. Kenya is not going to be shipping all of its nuclear waste to Finland. Finland won't accept it. They have a hard time storing their own waste. Kenya does not have a plan for safe storage and disposal of this waste, which means that whatever nuclear power plant is located in Kenya is also going to be, for lack of an alternative, the long-term waste disposal site for very, very dangerous carcinogenic waste that will long-term have a very damaging effect on the people around the plant and the ecosystems around the plant. Further, one last thing, in terms of fuel security, Kenya has lots and lots and lots and lots of solar energy and geothermal energy that pour into the country every single day. To run a nuclear plant, you don't have a uranium mining and enrichment program in Kenya. So that means you're going to have to import the fuel for the plant from other countries. There are a couple countries that produce that fuel. One is the United States, and those fuels are only good for light water reactors. From what I've heard of Kenya's plans, and I'm not privy to them, they were planning more on heavy water reactors, which means that you'd get your fuel from Canada. But the problem with heavy water reactors, of course, is that they produce more plutonium, which is the things that nuclear weapons need. And so the long-term storage and disposal of those wastes are even more of a problem. So in terms of fuel security, you don't have it. In terms of long-term waste disposal, you don't have it. So even if the plant operated well, which is unlikely because no nuclear power plants go without accidents or shutdowns or problems, you don't have a plan for both the fueling and the storage. The idea that nuclear power is carbon neutral is also a complete lie spread by the nuclear energy agencies. It's only carbon mitigating when it's in operation mode. But when you're mining the uranium, enriching the uranium, if you're going to use light water reactors, that uses highly enriched uranium, which is done at coal plants in the United States. And the concrete that it costs to build the building also has a very significant carbon impact. A nuclear power plant, research shows this, a nuclear power plant has to run flawlessly, which never happens, for 20 years before it repays its carbon debt. That means it comes into a being with lots of carbon and it doesn't even repay that debt for easily 20 years of operation. So in my humble opinion, now I'm not a Kenyan, I think this is the craziest possible electric solution for Kenya's needs when you have so many renewable options at your doorstep. I come from a very cold northern climate. We can't use solar nearly as well as Kenya does, and we are using it. We are using it because it's better, it's cheaper, and it's safer. It's also less centralized. So that means that the electricity that is generated by solar and other forms of distributed renewable energy is produced where it's needed. It's not shipped over these long distribution lines that all have line losses and lose energy as it's being distributed, making it more expensive for everybody. So that's what I had to say to begin with. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gwen. I see a hand from Justus. I suppose you want to respond to this.
Yes, I just wanted to first check Gwen and state as follows. I think when you're having this conversation, it's good that we are honest and we state the real facts. In terms of Chernobyl, only 31 people directly died as a result of this. And these are the statistics from IAEA. And two of the people who died were the plant workers, and they died on the night of the disaster inside the facility. One employee died shortly after from a non-radiological cardiac arrest during the emergency response, and 28 of the other people who died were the firefighters who were exposed to radiation. So in terms of the loss because of technology, it is not because the nuclear technology is dangerous to cause death, but it is because of the accident and the way it was handled that these 28 firefighters died. The modern nuclear power plants have learned from those experiences and have very, very rigorous safety measures such that whatever happened in Chernobyl will never happen again. From the experience in Fukushima through the World Association of Nuclear Operators, the nuclear operators have come together and studied the causes and learned from that. Following the 9/11 attack again, modern nuclear plants are designed to withstand being hit by planes. And what we are saying is that accidents will happen. Everything has a risk in it. And when they happen, you don't run away from a technology and close. You actually, as human beings who have intelligence, you study the problem and design strategies to address the risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justus. I see Gwen has a response for that. Gwen?
Yes, sorry. I may have gotten the immediate deaths incorrect, and I appreciate you correcting me. However, given the amount of falsehoods that the nuclear industry spreads, the number of deaths around Chernobyl immediately afterwards is a small mistake compared to calling a technology that has waste that is dangerous for 250,000 years safe technology. It's not safe.
Unfortunately, the people who spread falsehoods are the anti-nuclear groups. The nuclear people rely on facts. Many of you come up with pictures that are not even related to nuclear incidents and try to spread fear into people. I think let's have a genuine conversation about this technology without spreading fear and let science really guide the process. Thank you.
If science is really going to guide the process, then the science of how dangerous the fuel is and how dangerous the long-term waste is should be able to prevail. Because to produce a form of electricity that's going to create waste that needs people to keep it safe for longer than we've had written language is just a fool's errand. I'm sorry.
Amos?
Yeah, just a quick one. Let's come back home from Kennedy. The thing is, just as you keep mentioning about technology, you see, energy is social, energy is economics. The question we are dealing with here about energy is about affordability, it's about access. When we ask these two questions, because technology cannot be divorced from the socials and the economics, nuclear does not provide the answer. Actually, technology is supposed to provide solutions. What nuclear does, instead of providing solutions, it provides us with a lot of social and economic problems. Leave alone the safety that my colleagues have already spoken to and all things that can go wrong, but also the sovereignty. We in Kenya here, we have seen what has happened recently with the energy crisis. We all of us now know the Strait of Hormuz because of the cost of energy going through the roof. Do we still want to depend on imported fuel? Because nuclear does not provide us with that energy sovereignty that we need. We'll have to depend on imported fuel. So if we are talking about helping communities, and Peter mentioned rightly that we need to be running hospitals, we need to be irrigating our farms when the rains fail, which energy source are we going to look at? Are we going to look for nuclear that will come 20 years later? Very expensive technology, highly centralized, that is not likely to serve the rural folk? Or are we going to look at an energy system that can be quickly deployed, that is decentralized, that doesn't provide us with this risk? So we need to be real. And for the economics of nuclear, Fred, I will assure you, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Francesco was talking about the UK project that had its estimated cost double. So we are not just talking about the trillions that are going to go into this project. Already we have lost more than 6 billion. But if we are going to commit to this project, we are going to lose trillions without, or even before, we have a single unit of energy coming online. Really, when we have 1 in every 5 Kenyans not having access to electricity, do we really want to go that path? I don't think it makes social sense. It doesn't make economic sense.
Thank you for that, Amos. I'll go to Dickens and then Justus, maybe you can hold your response and then I'll ask you a question that you can just aggregate all your responses to. Dickens?
Okay, I think I would like to also contribute to a few issues. So it is a question of fact. It is a matter of fact that there have been nuclear accidents around the world, whether it's Chernobyl, whether it is the 3 Mile accident or Fukushima. Those are facts that we cannot run away from. And this is interesting because one of the reasons why Lake Victoria region was actually disqualified as a potential site is because of the presence of hills that may, cause volcanic activity. And if you look at that draft report at page 82, it actually states that volcanic activity can travel 400 kilometers. In 1968, there was an earthquake in Homa Bay town. So many people actually believe that Homa Hills is active. So putting up a nuclear power plant in Siaya, for example, along Lake Victoria region, is already a risk of accident. And the way we handle disaster as a country is problematic. Even ordinary floods in Nairobi, the capital city of Kenya, we can't handle that. We can't handle floods even in Kisumu. We can't even handle, simple issues to do with food insecurity in the north and many other areas. So the question is, do we really have systems to handle that disaster? Do we really have systems to handle that disaster? Number 2, when they come to the community, they say that nuclear will give us cheaper electricity. But when you look at the mechanics of electricity production, when power is produced or generated from the source, it is evacuated to the main grid. So it means nuclear energy will be evacuated to industrial hubs, for example, in Thika. So the local communities will not have access to this cheaper power in quotes. And this has been proven in Olkaria. For example, there is a research. There are so many reports. The communities around Olkaria have no power, yet they produce electricity. In fact, the government is organizing for them how they can get access to solar energy, yet they produce electricity. So these are some of those facts that we need to put on the table. I had someone talking about energy poverty and etc. So those are issues that we need to speak to truthfully. Number 3, there is no known uranium mining site in Kenya. We'll have to transport it. The risk of contamination is high. So those diseases that we talk about, whether it's cancer or etc., we are still at risk of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Dickens. And actually what you've raised is tying into the question I wanted to ask Justus. So we can just compound that response, Justus. And this is really, as we are seeing it, this is a question that won't go away. NuPEA's own IEA endorsed review flagged that Lake Victoria region for volcanic hazards due to also the rift system, and judged the coast, that is Kilifi, most suitable for this project. which is why the first plant was proposed to be there. After Kilifi rejected it, the project moved to Siaya with no new geological study published. And your own engineer, that's Francis Agar, said in March that the shift was partly the political side of it. How do you justify citing a reactor on ground your own agency's science had flagged before?
Thank you very much. Let me begin by saying that when we did our siting exercise, we had, from the word go, we started with looking at Lake Turkana, Lake Victoria, and the Indian Ocean and the Tana River region. And we looked at all those places. At the end of the whole exercise, the final official report is that we identified 3 sites. It has never been the case that Kilifi was the only site. We have always had 3 sites as potential sites for development of nuclear plants in Kenya. And one of them was Kilifi, another one was Kwale, and another one was Siaya. All those were in contention. What then follows are detailed site characteristics which involve detailed scientific studies to determine the suitability of the site. And this is what we will then move in to do. And we are going to do this with an open mind and as I said, with science at the forefront. And we're going to do this with the support not only of IEA, but international experts. And what the experts have indicated to us that development of nuclear projects is an engineering assignment. We have a country like Japan, which has many earthquakes, but has 54 nuclear power plants. We have countries where, like the US, where we have nuclear power plants being sited on the lakes. So it is not a unique situation that Kenya has decided to site the nuclear plant on Siaya. And the location that has been identified has been confirmed not to be susceptible to the concerns that are being raised. But going to what Dickens is saying, and the conversation that Dickens is raising is really the conversation that we are saying is the kind of conversation we need to have as a country. When the government decides to do a project that will help the people, we should not dismiss the project and focus on skepticism and such other things, but we should pressure test the proposal and ask the hard questions. And these are the questions that we at NuPEA are preparing to come and have a conversation with the people of Siaya. And let me say this clearly. The government of Kenya is a responsible government, and it will not implement any project without following the laws of this country. In our constitution, there's a requirement that there must be stakeholder engagement before a project is implemented. In our national laws, there are similar requirements, and it is a deliberate move that we're going to follow to ensure that we engage the people of Siaya and the people of Kenya as a whole. And I saw a question in the chat. Is it that a decision has been made whether it will be accepted or not? No, I think in terms of stakeholder engagement, it is about responding to the concern and getting the social license that is required. And let me say, because I speak from a position of knowledge, the acceptance levels at Siaya are very high. In fact, if you compare to acceptance levels even in places like the US, we have a very, very reasonable acceptance level. What is happening is that when there are riots and the media that is and I don't want to use Donald Trump's words, the media that likes to hype things, they make it look like the whole of the Siaya community is against the project. In reality, I have been there. We have talked to the people, and there's a lot of acceptance. And what we want to do is to not ignore any voice. Every voice matters, and we'll listen to them. At the end of the day, the decision will be made based on what the people of Siaya will say and the people of Kenya will say. But we will ensure that in delivering this project, we follow both the best practices globally and our constitution and the laws. And we'll also ensure that in any case where there'll be cases of land acquisition, that the proper procedures shall be applied, that there will be prompt and adequate compensation, and there will be proper resettlement of the people concerned. But we are ready to listen to the concerns and answer the questions without coming with fixed ideas about the whole concept. Thank you very much.
Maybe Fred can come and then Dickens.
Yeah, thanks. I think my reaction around all this debate is the fact that in terms of the priorities as a country and in terms of where we are as an economy, and I don't think this is one of the top priorities. And of course, when Kenya wants to do these big shiny projects, they always compare us with bigger economies. Japan is the 4th largest economy in the world. Germany is the 3rd largest economy in the world. US is number 1, and all these big countries. But Kenya is the 65th largest economy. We are among the poorest nations. But when we want to throw in a project here and there, then we start comparing ourselves with the superpowers. We are not superpowers. Secondly, we haven't had, who is bankrolling this? Where is the technology coming from? Who are the financiers? Why is the agreement? We need to understand these facts, and we need to see them on paper. And we need to understand also where we are getting all these ideas from in terms of, the financiers, who own the technology for this, who are the banks involved in these transactions. We need to see the details of all this. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Fred. Dickens, you want to respond on this?
Yes, I want to respond a few things. Number one, I think it is a blatant lie to say that a site had been cited in Siaya. If I looked at that final CESA report very well, there were only 2 sites that were recommended for full environmental impact assessment. And those sites were in Kilifi and in Kwale. Siaya was nowhere in that report. So this idea of we have cited a site in Siaya is neither here nor there. Because if they have done so, then what is the reason for looking at the 8 potential candidate sites? Number 2, on acceptability level, the people cannot accept or consent to what they don't know about. Our people do not know about nuclear. So this acceptability is about a few politicians here and there, and a group of people who are having tea at an hotel in Kisumu. And that is not public participation. That is not acceptability. So I would like to correct that just before we move, that there is no site in Siaya that had been cited before. I had never seen it in the draft report. Acceptability level, people cannot consent to what they don't know about.
Terry, just in one second, let me say, and this is official government position of Kenya, that Siaya is one of the sites that had been identified, and it has always been there. And we have records. And Dickens, you're welcome to come and confirm. We have details that Siaya has always been one of the sites that was under consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justus. I think it will be prudent for us to share that report with everyone who's on this call to also make their own judgment. Peter, I see your hand up. Please quickly before we move on to the next question.
Oh, yeah. I think I dropped off earlier, but I wanted to respond to Gwen on the issue of nuclear waste. It's easy to speak and say that Kenya as a country does not have the capacity or expertise to handle nuclear waste. But I'd like to note that the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority is already handling radioactive waste as of now, radioactive waste that comes from hospitals. And this is the same institution that will create systems that can be able to handle nuclear waste. And even then, I'd like to note that the volume of waste that is produced from nuclear power plants is not that much significant and is produced after it's spent fuel that can be reused. And so when you say that it's going to stay for 250 years continuously, 250,000 years, then within this period, only approximately, I think, 3% of the fuel capacity of that rod is used in the first run. And through storage, these new technologies can come up and are coming up that can reuse this spent fuel for additional energy generation. So it's not really waste that is being thrown away, never to be used again, but fuel that can be reused in the future where need be. And also still on the case of waste, let's not just dismiss nuclear on the basis of waste without considering that all other power generation technologies also produce waste. Solar panels produce waste. Wind turbines in themselves produce waste once their running time is over. And as such, this waste also goes somewhere. But the only thing about nuclear is that its waste is not as significant as that of these others. Thank you.
Gwen, I see you want to respond to that. And I actually was going to ask a question that is neighboring what Peter just raised. So just allow me to add in that question and you can answer it, give a component answer on that. So my question to you is, this was mentioned earlier that Finland has spent over 20 years building the first permanent waste repository, which is burying fuel 400 meters down into 2 billion-year-old bedrock to last at least 100,000 years. The honest question, and just tying it to what Peter is saying, is deep burial, first of all, a genuine permanent solution or the best temporary answer to a problem that no one has truly solved? And is it responsible for Kenya to start generating waste in 2027 with no storage plan at all? Gwen? Gwen, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. So, first of all, comparing hospital waste to high-level radioactive waste is not accurate. Hospital waste is low-level radioactive waste, and it can be handled much more easily than high-level, long-term radioactive waste. You say that radioactive waste could be used again. That is not true. There is a kind of reactor that's been tested called a breeder reactor that was trying to reuse the waste, and by and large, they have not been successful. So in fact, the radioactive waste that is radioactive for 250,000 years is going to need to be stored, cared for, and monitored for the entirety of its half-life. Telling people something else is just not realistic. Finland, as Sherry said, has developed a deep storage facility, but in imagining that you can just bury the stuff and walk away, you're missing the entire life of the planet we live on and depend on for our sustenance. If there's any kind of accident there and it gets into the groundwater, then you're drinking radioactive groundwater. There's really no way known currently to safely store and dispose of the very highly radioactive waste that comes out of these plants. In the vast majority of plants, not in Finland, that waste is currently stored on site for the nuclear power plants in southern Vermont, in a plant that closed down there. Even though the plant isn't running anymore, the waste is still stored there. So effectively, by setting up a nuclear power plant, you're also setting up a long-term waste disposal site right on the shoreline of the world's #1 freshwater fishery. That is just, it's taking our need for electricity and ignoring our needs for livelihoods, food, and sustenance.
Thank you, Gwen. I want to move to Dickens. Dickens, most of Siaya did not learn of the plant through consultation, as you said. They had it through a government announcement. And last month, hundreds in Sakwa took to the streets and disrupted a public participation forum. And NuPEA then promised it would not proceed without the broad informed consent of the community, as you've also heard from Justus. So directly, were the people of Siaya genuinely asked or only told? And does that promise match what you're seeing on the ground? Because we've heard that NuPEA will not proceed without the consent of the community. What are you currently witnessing on the ground? Dickens?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Since the protest, I haven't seen them on the ground, or I haven't had any information of them appearing on the ground. Although I heard that, they were supposed to visit Sirongo, which is also one of the sites closer to me. On the issue of consent, so the reason why people were actually protesting is because these people came to collect soil samples without first consulting them. So they were protesting because soil samples were being collected without, first consultation and public participation. So for them, I think what they having also, read on nuclear widely around the world, their position is that they actually reject the project in totality. Yes.
Thank you for that, Dickens. And I think that is actually quite clear. Amos, we've heard that from the proponents who are saying that only nuclear power can give steady round-the-clock power. And you've also tried to debunk this. And I feel like we're in a conversation where we are having to make a real choice between nuclear versus expanding geothermal and solar that you already have. Could you just tell us a little bit more of which one is a smarter bet at this point and why? Just giving us more figures and better understanding about what exactly we're looking at here.
Yeah, and also just to acknowledge that in one of the questions, Nanteza had also asked that question, that every time we told about industrialization, we speak about solar. Solar cannot help us industrialize. And you see, the challenge we have on this continent is that when we talk about industrialization, we want to talk about minerals and all these big industries. But we forget that what sustains us to begin with is agriculture. Some of the challenges that we face on the continent is food wastage. So even powering small industries such as agro-processing, we need energy. And most of these activities happen in rural areas, agricultural activities. These highly centralized energy systems have proved to us that they do not provide power to the communities. We saw what happened with even renewables, such as Lake Turkana wind project, where we have those pylons passing over people's houses to power activities elsewhere. So if we really want to empower communities, we need to first of all decide which energy source has the capacity to power communities. Small activities within communities without even thinking about big manufacturing or big industry. Solar does that. Solar will help communities to be able to irrigate their farms when the rain falls and process their produce, thereby avoiding food wastage and helping us become food sovereign. Number two, in terms of where have we seen solar power industries, the thing is there is a solar revolution happening on the continent. When you look at the statistics, Africa actually is one of the highest continents that are deploying solar. So the energy revolution on our continent is not happening in centralized grids. It's happening on rooftops through technologies such as solar. In DRC, if you check this up, solar is being used to power mining activities because of storage. But for Kenya, back home, we are not just talking about solar. We have diverse sources of energy. We can't really be thinking of nuclear when you have these huge, diverse energy sources. Geothermal is one of them. We are a leader in geothermal development on the continent. And actually, Kenyan experts have been going around the continent, even building capacity in other countries on geothermal development. So we are a pioneer. Why not utilize this huge potential that we have for industrialization? Why are we only thinking about a dangerous energy source that is expensive, takes long time, already has taken huge budgets from our public resources without anything to show for? Why would we want to go that way when we all have all this diversity also?
Thank you, Amos. I just want to pick some questions that have been fronted by, maybe before that, Justus, you can come in, then we can just go into some questions that have been fronted by our participants and attendees in the
Just
room.
a quick one to
Justus?
respond to Amos. Yeah, to respond to Amos. Yes, we are saying that we are very, very proud of our energy sources, and we love solar, we love wind, we love geothermal, and it is part of our national strategy to exploit these clean sources. But the fact of the matter is that our geothermal potential is up to 10,000. And there are other statistics that we are finding, and maybe you can get a time to discuss with the experts, but I don't want to go into that. But the thing is this: we are not thinking 5 years, 10 years. We have decided to think like the rest of the developed world. We are now starting to plan 50, 100 years. You heard about our president talking about Singapore. We are not going to get to Singapore unless we have sufficient energy. And Kenya is looking at having at least 60,000 megawatts. Where is this megawatts going to come from? And with climate change, we run the risk of waking up and finding some of the rivers that we've known running for centuries drying up. So we are deliberately deciding as a country to think long term and to plan long term and to be in charge of our energy sources to ensure that we do in industrialization. Someone talked about our peak, our peak, and our generation to the grid. I mean that is the thinking that we've always had, and we cannot keep thinking small. We have decided that we want to think big, and as Kenya, all Kenyans, you know the story about Singapore and Korea. They were also thinking small like us at some point, but they had leaders who came and encouraged the people to think big and see and believe that these things can also happen to us. And this is where Kenya is now. And I don't think we will have people coming from outside to try and get us back to where we were, so that we keep on thinking small. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justus. Actually, I have a question from the chat from you, and I'm going to just join it with a question I'd asked earlier that I don't think you touched on. So we have a question from Ayub, who's saying the government is gambling with the nuclear power plant project. How sure are the officials, NuPEA, and the government that they are not going to embezzle what is meant for waste management, considering that Kenya has a lot of history of environmental pollution? And I just want you to answer that question along with what I'd asked, because we had your own engineer, as I mentioned earlier, Francis Agar, who said in March that the shift to Siaya was was also influenced by the political side of it. How do you, just going back on that, because it's a question of integrity here, based on what we've noticed and seen, observed as well with government projects, how do you actually plan to see this project through and guarantee the citizens of Kenya that we will not see the common trend we have seen with other big projects?
Thank you very much. I think, as I said earlier, that when the government comes out with proposals, the role of the citizens is to ask questions and to pressure test those proposals. And we agree with the concerns that are being raised. And as a country and a government, we are going to listen to the people. We want this to work, and we want to be put to have checks and balances to ensure that we do it the right way. And the voices that are being raised here by people like Dickens and everyone else are very important voices that we are going to listen to ensure that we do it the right way. In terms of environmental pollution, every activity produces waste. And that is why you will find that every household has a waste management scheme. I mean, we have toilets, we have and all that kind of thing. And it's the same thing with nuclear. There will be some waste generated. And as we plan to use this technology, we are already thinking about the issues, the strategies of how we'll manage it. We have already developed a nuclear waste management policy, which is already with the minister, and it's going to go through the rigors of lawmaking, and Kenyans will have an opportunity to have their say on the matter. In terms of Siaya, let me say the official position is that Siaya has always been one of the sites that we've been considering. Whether it's political, let me say that what is politics? The politics is the means through which we allocate resources in our country. So there will be a political aspect to it, but not the way it is trying. I think it is trying to be portrayed. The reason why we have now decided to Siaya is because we had strong resistance from the coast, and that is natural, and we respect the position of the people of the coast. And that is not to say that we will never build a nuclear plant at the coast. We believe that once we build a nuclear plant in Siaya, the people at coast will be able to see that this is a technology that can be deployed safely, and they will welcome it. Let me say this, and I'm saying this from a point of knowledge, that there are already petitions from the people of Kilifi saying, why did you abandon us? And there are leaders petitioning government to reconsider and requesting government to see whether they can locate that project back to Kilifi. And this is even in the public domain. The president has said it. And therefore, what we are saying is that Siaya has been one of the sites that we were considering to build a nuclear plant, and we are going to go through the normal scientific processes to determine the suitability of the site before we proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justus. Actually, there are quite a number of questions for you in the chat, and I hope you can just provide a little bit more insight on this, because as Kenyans, we are very curious this evening. I have one question from Daryl that says, the questions keep fluctuating from 600 billion to the latest 500 billion, from 10,000 megawatts to 2,000 megawatts. Not sure if the technical terms or units are used in measuring it. The question is, why would I trust such an inconsistent process? Why should we trust that Siaya will be safe, relocation will be consented? Will Siaya get electricity cheaply, considering it is a host? Are the residents of Olkaria, where the geothermal energy plants, getting electricity at a lower cost? And I just want to, you to speak on the numbers. Let me just add another questions onto that. We have a question from Safina that says the cost of generating solar power ranges from $36 to $44 per megawatt per hour. The World Nuclear Industry Status Report said while onshore wind power comes in at $29 to $56, nuclear energy costs between 112 and 189 per megawatt. So how do we justify this cost to Kenyans, who more than half of the population live by less than $3 a day, and specifically the community who will lose their land and livelihood in the process? Justus?
Thank you. Let me start. Let me start with the costs. I think the comparison that is normally done forgets to take into account one aspect. Solar and wind projects and hydro projects will last between 50 and 30 years. Nuclear projects last for 100 years. So when we talk about the levelized cost of electricity, you will find that nuclear is quite affordable. And therefore, this is what we are focusing on. In terms of the official position of what generation of electricity Kenya wants to do from nuclear, the official position is that in the long term, with up to 2050, we think that we can generate 6,000 megawatts of electricity from nuclear. But for immediate intentions and the purposes for Siaya, we are going to build a 2,000 megawatt plant, which will come to the grid in 2034. That is the official position. You may have noted that there were different figures along the way, and that is normal because even when you go to budgeting, you start with a wish list and then you come back to reality. So consultations have been undertaken, and the formal position of the government of Kenya is to start by building a 2,000 megawatt plant in Siaya starting next year to come on board in 2034. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justus. I see Gwen has a hand up. Gwen?
I just needed to respond to the idea that nuclear power plants will last 100 years. That's not a proven fact. There's been no nuclear power plant so far that has lasted that long. And the one that I shut down in Franklin County, Massachusetts, had only been operating 20 years. It was up for its license renewal. And already the parts of the plant had worn to the point where it could not continue operation. The one that was recently shut down in southern Vermont, same story. 30 years was about as long as it could take. To imagine that these plants that are built out of materials like concrete and steel are going to last 100 years when they're barraged with nuclear radiation all the time is just not a proven fact. And so calling out that it's going to be a long-lasting source of energy isn't factual or based on reality.
Just in one word, I think in response to Gwen, technology is evolving and changing, and we have new ways of doing things. The technology that was there 50 years ago is not what we have. Thank you very much.
Dickens?
I just want to point out that I am really worried about the official position of the government that they have to start construction next year, 2027. For the avoidance of doubt, a project of this magnitude would include the following reports. And number one, final strategic environmental and social assessment report, which is the CESA report. That is still in draft. We are not even talking about the final document. It is still in draft. It has not been included. We will also need a comprehensive environmental and social impact assessment report. Full environmental impact assessment has not been done. We will also need to discuss with the community a resettlement action plan, including livelihood restoration plan. We still don't have them. They have not even released a stakeholder engagement plan. And we have seen these mega projects somewhere else. So where are they going to get all this documentation? Are they going to cook them? Because we cannot say we are starting the project next year in 2027 when we have not even complied with the critical steps, or is it a predetermined project?
Thank you, Dickens, for that. And there's a question here for CS Justus, just asking, in terms of what was already invested and given to NuPEA, what happened to that money, just for the sake of transparency and accountability? I think Amos also touched on that we saw quite a big amount of money invested into NuPEA for these same projects, yet we've seen nothing so far.
Thank you very much, and that is a very valid concern. I think what I will say is as follows. First of all, nuclear projects take long preparatory times, especially when you're following the IEA milestone. And Kenya has decided that they will strictly follow the IEA milestone approach. We'd rather delay a bit, but ensure that we do it the right way, because as we all appreciate, nuclear requires to be deployed very safely. And I think on that point, we should be thanking the government of Kenya, because we have not been in a rush. We've been doing this, taking our time to ensure that we do it right. And this goes to maybe what Dickens has been talking about a minute ago. We have been working. It's not like we have just woken up and started doing what we are doing in Siaya. There's work that has been going on, and it's still going on, and we'll ensure that we do everything to book. In terms of what some of the works that we've been doing, remember that you cannot do the nuclear project without human capital. We have been getting Kenyans and taking them to countries where the technology is, and getting them to preparing them to work in the nuclear space in terms of capacity building. The other activity that we have been undertaking is the stakeholder engagement. We've also carried out the CESA activity that Dickens talks about, and we have also already carried out technology assessment. We have issued requests for information, and we have been preparing the country in terms of having the appropriate laws and legislations and institutions that will support the nuclear project. We have also been undertaking studies on the best mode of how we'll finance the project. And we have been working also to attain national position, because you also need to get the policy makers to understand what they are getting into. And that is why I think it has taken a while to get a bold pronouncement of the position of the executive on the nuclear project. The current administration is the first one to boldly declare that Kenya is going nuclear, and that is also a requirement under the IEA guidelines, what is referred to as national position. This has now been cemented, and we are now ready to go. I could say the plane is on the runway, ready to take off. Thank you very much.
Okay, and just one more thing. Are you able to clarify who's funding this? Because as Fred mentioned earlier, that these plans are quite costly and can cost $10 to $30 billion and can take 10 plus years to build. And given that we are not a superpower, who is funding this? And how can debt-heavy Kenya, we're already struggling with so much debt in this country, how can we afford this without crushing taxpayers?
Thank you very much. I think that's one of the also infrastructure issues that we are addressing under the IEA. We are having serious conversations within government to determine the best mode of building this project without saddling with Kenyans with more liability. And there's very good progress going on. And you are aware that we have the infrastructure fund, National Infrastructure Fund. That's an area that is being looked at. You're also aware that the World Bank has unfrozen its freeze on funding nuclear projects. That is a promise to attract concessional funding towards nuclear projects, which will cause the projects to be de-risked. We have also very great interest that is developing from our local financial institutions. I can tell you that we've had conversations with banks such as Kenya Commercial Bank, and they are showing interest. And we've been to sessions where, like recently, I came from a meeting on nuclear in Rwanda, and there is this idea that the local industry must have a skin in it for the international partners to come and join us. There are also developments across the globe where philanthropic funding is also being considered to come and support nuclear projects the way they support others. Because if you're having philanthropic funding to build hospitals, why can't it be utilized to build nuclear projects that will support the infrastructure for hospitals and other amenities that are required by the population? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I want us to move to closing remarks. I think we've had quite a rich discussion from our panelists. I'll start with you, Peter, and mainly because I want you to touch on something that has been asked by one of the attendees, and they are a Ugandan listening in and have benefited quite a lot from the debate. Uganda is also in the process of starting up a nuclear power plant, as we mentioned earlier, and they have the same concerns, given that Kenya is ahead of Uganda in terms of readiness and the number of nuclear trained professionals. Is there a platform that has been established to share experience and research across East Africa? And just tie that in with your closing remarks.
I think the one thing that stands out, especially when nuclear projects are being conducted, is the collaboration between various countries to ensure the success of every single nuclear power project. And this is because, you see, nuclear has impact beyond the country of operation. So all the countries have vested interest to ensuring the successful implementation of this project. And for Uganda, I believe once they are ready to start the process, the IEEA, the International Atomic Agency, is the one that is mandated to bring these countries together and share the expertise of the different experts that are there in advancing nuclear. And on to closing, I think I'd say that maybe we should try and assess nuclear energy on the same basis as any major infrastructure project. So whether it's a geothermal or a hydro, let's try and assess nuclear based on this. So if there are these rigorous environmental assessments and any transparent regulatory oversight, then they should be conducted just as any other project should be done. And the people should give the implementing organization some grace to perform this and report back to them so that they can make their decisions based on facts. And when these conditions that the people have set have met, then it's easier for the project to be implemented, because now it caters both for the needs of the people and for the needs of the organization. And also I note that in case there are any questions, I think we've conducted several as we plan it. We have chapters in Kenya, Uganda, Zimbabwe, and Nigeria. And we've conducted activities and engagement activities that listen to the people on the basis of nuclear energy. And this is also, especially for a country like Zimbabwe, they've not even shown their interest in taking up nuclear, but we're already there to try and listen to the people and engage them early enough so that we can know what they need. Because one thing is that engagement, as just as I had said earlier, engagement starts way before the power plant is built. So once we start earlier, people can build the facts, knowledge and information that they have, and then they may be able to make more informed decisions regarding their energy futures instead of relying on any misinformation that may come up. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'll move on to Gwen. Please give us your closing remarks. I think you've had enough from the discussion we've had tonight.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to start by countering something that I saw a lot in the comments and that Justus said, which is that you can't achieve industrialization without nuclear energy. And that we need nuclear energy as the base load to make sure that we have economic development. In fact, most industrialization around the world has taken place completely without nuclear energy. Hydropower has been much more important as an energy source for industrialization than nuclear. And in the United States anyway, which is admittedly, where I'm more of an expert than anyone else, than anywhere else that we're discussing, the link between economic output and energy output was broken in the 1980s, when we learned that by achieving more energy efficiency and moving to renewables, we could break that link and achieve lots of economic growth without necessarily having the corresponding energy growth. The reliance also on the IAEA is a misaligned confidence. IAEA is grossly underfunded. They don't have the inspectors that they need to even do the basic security that they have been charged with doing, which is to try and prevent this nuclear waste and nuclear fuel from being diverted to nuclear weapons, which of course is something we haven't talked about a lot at all today, which is the link between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. The nuclear power came out of the nuclear weapons industry as a way that the United States was trying to make nuclear energy more palatable. It was called the Atoms for Peace program, and I've seen some of that rhetoric echoed in Kenya even 50 years later. So expecting the IAEA to make sure that your plants are safe is not a good expectation. They really can't even make sure that the nuclear waste isn't diverted to nuclear weapons. The only security they have are these little things they put on, much as you have on a ship as you're going through customs, and they show up 6 months later and see that that little seal has been broken, and that's when they know maybe there was some diversion, but they don't know who did it or how, or it's really a misaligned confidence. And the third final point I'd like to make is just on Kenyan fuel security. You don't have a uranium mining and enrichment program in Kenya. That's a fact. That means you're going to have to buy your nuclear fuel from other countries, which puts you in a very dependent position on those other countries, who, by the way, are not all that reliable. I mean, look at what's been going on in the United States for the last 2 years. Tariffs and crazy economic constraints that other countries are feeling the effects of without any voice in that matter. And that's who you're putting your trust in for your energy future when you're investing in nuclear power. Further, the financing hasn't been answered. Billionaires love nuclear power plants because it gives them a place to park their wealth with government guaranteed returns on investment. But those returns on investment come out of your tax dollars in Kenya and your security, not the billionaires. So I really think you need to think hard about these very capital intensive, fuel insecure, waste insecure projects as part of your energy future, and look instead to the really good stuff Kenya has: geothermal, solar, wind, hydro, plenty of sources of renewable energy that can build a industrial base, if that's what you want, just as well as nuclear power can. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. I'll move on to Andrian. Closing remarks, please. Andrian?
Yes. So the thing is, your concerns, all of you, the concerns you've raised are valid, needed in Kenya because there's a demand for it. And I think we should continue engaging in the policy briefs and whatever the government will provide. A lot of sensitization is being done and public participation before before the actual construction of the nuclear power plant. So the government will ensure that all the right procedures are followed in conjunction with the IAEA.
Thank you, Andrian. I'll move over to Fred. Closing remarks, please.
Yeah, thanks for the rich discussions. I think I didn't want to speak about the financing because we have circled back to where I thought we will be going. We are getting a loan for this, either domestic resource mobilization through the local banks or concessional loans to the from the World Bank. You know, it circles back to all that. And I think that's pretty obvious. The National Infrastructure Fund, you know, that's coming out of your pockets. It's a sad day for the Kenyan taxpayer, I have to say, when I look at this project in totality. It's another layer of, you know, accumulated debt. We are already in a hole as a country. If you live in this country, you know. we are not answering the right questions, why we need this power. We don't industrialize from establishing nuclear power plants. The challenge of industrialization and manufacturing lies on our trade policy and our industrial policy. We have been a net importer for the last couple of years, over a decade now. So it's an economic fallacy to say, once you have these power plants, excess energy, then you'll go back to industrialization when you haven't sorted your industrial path and you haven't, readjusted your industrial policy to support local manufacturing, value addition, and also making sure that you're not a net importer, either of finished products or even a net importer of industrial goods. We are also an importer, or rather an exporter of raw materials, and that's by design. And we can only reverse that if we want to get the country moving forward. So as a taxpayer, fold your hands, prepare your pockets, and it's more taxes coming your way.
Wow, Fred. Over to you, Justus. Closing remarks, please.
Thank you very much. I want to thank my colleagues for a lively session. I think we had a very civilized conversation. And what I will say is that we need to have more of this. The nuclear project is a project that is good for the country. Other countries made the sacrifices to have energy sovereignty, and it has paid off. It has been able to move them from underdeveloped status to a developed status. And let me just say, and this is the position of Kenya, we are going to import the first technology, but we are very, very, very clear in our mind that we will go the Chinese or the Korean way, that we want in future to have homegrown technology. We have the brains, the ideas, and the will, and we'll do it. In terms of why nuclear, I think we are saying that we have decided to plan long term. We know the sources that we have, and we are happy with them. We are going to exploit them maximally, and we have already determined that we will need nuclear to come and plug the hole that will still exist after we've exhausted the sources that are there. And we are going to do this very responsibly. We are going to consult the people of Kenya. We are going to work with them. We are going to ask them, and we're actually calling them to hold us to account and to pressure test the ideas that we are presenting to them, to ensure that we answer the concerns that they have, and we are committed to ensure that every question that is raised shall be answered. In terms of the cost, yes, we appreciate that nuclear is expensive, but we are saying that it is going to answer to our needs as a country in terms of helping us address the energy demands, the base load, and also to respond to our climate goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justus. I'll move over to Amos. Closing remarks, please.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sherry, and for Greenpeace Africa for hosting this great space. I think this is one of the most engaging spaces I've been to. Participants also have been quite engaging with them and the questions, and it shows the level of responsibility that Kenyans are taking in terms of holding the government accountable. You see, when you hear being sold ideas such as Singapore, instead questioning, and I hope it's not what I'm thinking, because Kenya has a history of corruption, and I hope this is not asking for what Roscoe was mentioning, that such big infrastructure projects are not to be conduits for grant. I hope that's not it, because clearly from the conversation we don't need nuclear. We have other sources. We have already spent huge amounts, nothing to show for it. We have a choice to make, to continue spending billions upon billions, or redirect those resources to enabling provision of the much needed energy access for the people, for development, for the industry that we are talking about. I know there is need for long-term planning, but it doesn't have to be utopic. It has to be realistic. And with nuclear, I don't think it's realistic, unless it's what I'm thinking.
Thank you, Amos. And last but not least, Dickens, your closing remarks.
Thank you for hosting us. I think it's been a pleasure hearing from other people, and surely I have actually learned a lot from various perspectives, especially our sisters and brothers from outside the country. So my last remarks would be on community consultations and the process of the implementation of the projects. One, I have seen on the charts, or I've heard somewhere somebody say that it is impossible to industrialize as a nation without nuclear, but facts would point otherwise. Austria is an industrialized nation. In 1978, the decision whether Austria could actually use nuclear fission to generate electricity was subjected to a referendum. And the people rejected it. And that has not stopped them from industrialization. So this idea that we need nuclear, as a matter of life and death, that it has to be there for us to move ahead, is one that is false. Number two, the government should not make assumption that the project has been widely accepted by the community. They should not be comfortable that, we have 1, 2, 3 politicians or political actors who are drumming support for the project, and they need to go to the grassroots. And I am actually surprised that the CEO of NuPEA said that there is a wide support for the project, when in their latest communication following the protest, they did say that they have been doing high-level consultation, and now they need to move to the grassroots. So it means they have not gone to the grassroots. So I actually wonder where this wide support is coming from. So the communities need to be consulted, and they need to be consulted widely and meaningfully. And they need to be informed, so that whether they are supporting or rejecting the project, it is based on information. It's not based on, political chants and etc. Number 3, the government should take the process of implementation of these projects seriously. We have seen that even the draft CESA report has been subjected to a lot of scrutiny, even by the international community. In fact, the Netherlands Environmental Commission did an advisory opinion on the same. And I suspect is the reason why it has not been finalized, or it has not been approved by NEMA. So they need to take their work seriously, because this is not like a road project or any other regular projects. We are dealing with the high-risk, sensitive projects, and they need to, to follow the procedures. We cannot say we are going to launch this project next year when we have not discussed so many things around the project. We have not even discussed the full environmental impact assessment reports, which they need to discuss with the community. And I have been following up on the expansion of Coburg power plant by ESCOM. The level of public participation that's happening there is not what we see in Kenya. And I've been making those comparisons. So I want to see NuPEA more engaged, and we want to see the seriousness of their work, because we will not allow, as a community, a project, we will not allow such kind of gambling as a community, to gamble with our lives, our livelihoods, and our future generation. That's my closing remark.
Thank you very much, and a huge thank you to our very engaging panel. We came here tonight to test one question. Has Kenya met the conditions that a nuclear project of this scale demands? You've had the official case, the case for, the case against. Let me close by being just as clear as I was at the start. Greenpeace opposes nuclear power here in Kenya and everywhere because it's dangerous, it's expensive, as we've heard, not because we doubt this country's ambition, but because the evidence you've heard tonight makes the case against it. The site was chosen over the objections of Kenya's own science. The community has not consented. There is no completed environmental impact assessment, no waste plan, and no financing clarity. These are not details to be resolved later. These are the foundations, and they are not in place. And there's a bigger truth beneath all of it. Every shilling and every year poured into nuclear is a shilling and a year taken away from the energy future Kenya could be building today. We already lead Africa in geothermal. We have vast untapped solar and wind. We have a renewable path that is cleaner, cheaper, faster, and that does not gamble our largest freshwater lake. Leave waste for hundreds of generations, as Gwen said, or saddle the next one with debt as well. So nuclear doesn't close that gap, it actually diverts us from it. Greenpeace Africa will be publishing an op-ed following tonight's discussion, drawing together what we've heard, and we will share it widely. If you share our view, or even if tonight simply gave you the question to ask, we ask you to keep connecting with us on all our platforms. My genuine thanks to every one of our panelists, including those who came to disagree with us, for engaging in good faith. Thank you all, and good night.